Hi there, it's Matt here, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into REM sleep and all of the different ways that you can try to increase or enhance the amount of REM sleep that you're getting. And of course, as many listeners know, REM sleep is that fascinating stage where your brain will light up in terms of its activity. Your eyes under the closed eyelids will start to dart back and forth, left and right, left and right. That's where it gets its name, by the way, rapid eye movement sleep. And that is the principal stage in which we have vivid, florid, and incredibly narrative-rich dreams. And today we're going to explore everything from pills to practices that can help increase this vital stage of sleep. And more specifically, we'll go through pharmacological methods for REM sleep enhancement, behavioral methods for REM sleep enhancement, lifestyle factors that can alter and augment your REM sleep, as well as some really exciting advanced new technologies for boosting your REM sleep. Let's set the stage. For healthy adults, REM sleep typically takes up somewhere between about 18 to 25% of your total sleep time. And that range is dependent on your age and some degree your sex, but for the most part your age. And as we get older, our REM sleep declines a little bit, but not actually that much. The stage of sleep, which by the way we'll do another podcast on, which is how to get more deep sleep. That's coming, that's down the pike, don't worry. But deep sleep takes a dramatic decline as we age. But REM sleep remains somewhat stable, but for many people, they're always interested in how to enhance this stage of sleep. A caveat as well, often when I'm out in the public and doing sort of speaking events and such, people will come up to me and they'll say, well, how can I get more REM sleep, or how can I get more deep sleep? And I ask them a question. I say, why? And they'll say, well, isn't REM sleep the good stuff, or isn't deep sleep the good stuff? And it turns out all of it is good stuff. Even light non-REM has benefits. And we need all of those different stages of sleep, light non-REM, deep non-REM, and REM, because different stages of sleep transact different benefits for the brain and the body at different times of night. So try not to think about optimization of sleep on any one of these single stages. It should be a balanced distribution. So what are the functions of REM sleep? In other words, why would you want to try to boost it? Lots of benefits. REM sleep is a form of emotional first aid. REM sleep is overnight therapy, and it improves your mental health. It's almost as though you are taking those difficult emotional experiences and processing them at night during your dreams, and so that they feel almost like a nocturnal soothing balm. They've been smoothed out and the sharp, painful edges have been taken away. REM sleep is also critical for learning and memory, particularly creativity, and associating memories together to come up with novel creative insights and solutions. By the way, I did a whole episode on the 9 functions of REM sleep that you probably were unaware of, but it does remarkable things for your hormones, for your cardiovascular system. It does wonderful things for your reproductive system. You can go back and check out that episode. But all of these are perhaps reasons to pay attention to REM sleep and maybe think about trying to optimize the amount of REM sleep. Again, keep in mind, balance is key. You don't just want to simply have all of your sleep composed of REM sleep, not that that would be possible, or all of it in deep sleep. It's the balance. Okay, number 1. First category with which you can try to leverage more REM sleep, pharmacology. Let's start by looking at the medications and the supplements that can enhance REM sleep. This is where the science gets really interesting from a mechanistic standpoint. There is a brain chemical, or what we call a neurotransmitter in your brain. And if there is one neurochemical that defines and helps generate rapid eye movement sleep, it is the neurotransmitter or neurochemical called acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is the star neurotransmitter when it comes to REM sleep. It's like the conductor of the REM sleep orchestra. So naturally, drugs that increase acetylcholine, or what we call cholinergic signaling. That's a fancy way of simply saying using acetylcholine to change the brain patterns and the brain activity, including rapid eye movement sleep, using this chemical, acetylcholine. So drugs that increase and enhance cholinergic signaling will often boost REM sleep. The first of those drugs that we discovered probably now many decades ago is something called, and wait for it, this is quite the mouthful, I'm sorry, but I'll spell it out for you. I won't spell it out for you, I'll read it out for you. These are drugs that are called acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. What does that mean? When you release acetylcholine, so when one neuron releases acetylcholine into the little gap, the synapse, between it and the next neuron, that chemical doesn't stick around forever. The nervous system in your brain is clever. That once you release acetylcholine into the synapse to communicate to the next neuron, the next message, there are enzymes that are hanging around like little Pac-Men in the synapse, and they're just waiting for that acetylcholine to be released, and very quickly they start to gobble it up. They essentially break it down. And so these enzymes are regulators. They help prevent the acetylcholine that's being released from one brain cell onto the next. They prevent it from sticking around too long, to prevent it having an excess amount of an influence. Everything in moderation. And those enzymes, these acetylcholinesterases, that's the enzyme, that these are the Pac-Men, as it were. You can manipulate those. And so these drugs are acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. They are the Pac-Men inhibitors. So they prevent or slow down the Pac-Men in the, I don't know why I'm using Pac-Men, but it's a visual image. There you go. They slow down the activity of that gobbling up the acetylcholine. So the acetylcholine that's been released by a neuron sticks around in the synapse for a longer period of time, and therefore it has a greater effect within the brain. So you can use these medications that come in. They inhibit the enzyme that breaks down the acetylcholine. The acetylcholine therefore increases in its efficiency, or its what we call efficacy. And there was one fascinating study by Schradel and colleagues, gosh, this was back in 2006, and they tested this drug, or one of these drugs, one of these acetylcholinesterase inhibitors called donepezil, and they looked at it in healthy adults. By the way, some of you may have heard of donepezil. Donepezil is used also not in the context of enhancing REM sleep, which it's really not prescribed for. It's actually in the context of Alzheimer's disease, because one of the neurotransmitters that is hit hardest in Alzheimer's disease is acetylcholine. So Alzheimer's patients have reduced levels of acetylcholine. So these drugs, these cholinesterase inhibitors like donepezil, will actually come in and they'll try to take what little acetylcholine is being released by the Alzheimer's brain and make it stick around for a longer period of time, and therefore, as a result, that activity of acetylcholine is increased and it gives back some of the brain function. Now, those drugs have shown mixed benefit for Alzheimer's patients, but that's not the purpose of this podcast. But coming back to it, in this study, they didn't focus on Alzheimer's patients. They looked at healthy individuals, and they gave this drug, this acetylcholinesterase inhibitor that slows down the breakdown of acetylcholine, called donepezil. And what they found was not only a marked increase in the total amount of REM sleep, but the density of the rapid eye movements, those left and right, that's the measure with which we use how sort of concentrated and frenetic your REM sleep activity actually is. The eye movements increased, the amount of total REM sleep increased, and the time with which you waited before you entered into REM sleep in the non-REM to REM sleep cycle arrived earlier. So in other words, the brain, which normally goes down into light non-REM, then deep non-REM, then back into light non-REM, and then after about 70 or 80 minutes pops up and has a REM sleep period. The brain with this drug got much more hungry for that rapid eye movement sleep earlier in the dining course of the sleep cycle experience. So it started to feast on REM sleep earlier in the 90-minute sleep cycle than it would otherwise. In plain English, what that means is that this drug that is able to manipulate acetylcholine increased the intensity of that REM sleep, and that REM sleep arrived earlier in the night, allowing for a greater amount of increased REM sleep proportion throughout the night. Acetylcholine, by the way, the reason that it is relevant for Alzheimer's disease, as perhaps many people know, is that acetylcholine in Alzheimer's disease helps in part regulate memory. It does in all of us. Because there in Alzheimer's patients, acetylcholine is deficient, they have memory problems. Therefore, if you artificially increase acetylcholine, perhaps through its memory benefit on increasing REM sleep, you would expect improved memory the next day. And in fact, in some follow-up intriguing studies, they showed that enhancing REM sleep by way of this drug, donepezil, it improved certain types of memory. And it suggests that the drug-induced enhancement of REM sleep provides a form of a cognitive booster by way of this sort of REM sleep pharmacological hack, as it were. I hate the word hack, but anyway, maybe it fits. That's not where it stops, though. There are other drugs that have been used to manipulate acetylcholine in the brain and change REM sleep. One of those is called galantamine, and it gained popularity, many decades ago for its ability to intensify dreaming itself. And a researcher called Stephen LaBerge, I think he published it back in 2018, they showed that by administering galantamine to individuals before bed, it roughly doubled the frequency of what we call lucid dreams, which are those sort of magical dreams where you're not just dreaming, but suddenly you realize that you're dreaming, and sometimes you can take control. It didn't just increase the probability that you would enter a state of lucid dreaming, but almost like an upgrade from a standard definition television to a 4K ultra high definition television, the intensity, the vividness, and the complexity of the dreams that those participants reported was significantly greater as a consequence. A long-standing partner of today's podcast is Element, spelled LMNT. Element is a sugar-free electrolyte drink mix, and for me, it was the sugar-free part that made me start using it a while back. And again, I buy my own supply just to stay objective. Beyond having the electrolytes in the right balance, the other reason I'm a fan of Element is that it's scientific. If you look up the people who created the company, you'll find some pretty heavy-hitting physiology, biochemistry, and pharmacology knowledge baked into the product. And again, all of that comes without any sugar. Now, here's the update. Element's lemonade salt flavor, which used to be seasonal, was so popular that it's now permanent. You can get it year-round. Happily, I badgered them, and they have agreed to give you fine folks a free 8-count sample pack with any purchase of Element if you use the link drinklmnt.com/Matt Walker. So for free product with your purchase, just visit drinklmnt.com/Matt Walker. And as I said, you'll get some free product. So next, let's discuss one of the most exciting developments in sleep medicine, I think, pharmacologically, which is a class of drugs called the DORAs drugs, DORA small s. And it stands for, here we go again, dual orexin receptor antagonists. These medications are things such as suvorexant and lomborexant. And orexin is a chemical naturally occurring in the brain, and essentially it's the wake-promoting chemical. And I just said that the name of these drugs is the dual orexin receptor antagonists, meaning that these new class of medications will target both of the orexin receptors in the brain, dual orexin receptor, dual, two of them, And if it is an agonist, it's going to increase the activity of that chemical, orexin. But these aren't. These are antagonists. So a drug that is an antagonist is designed to block the activity of that particular chemical. So here we're talking about dual orexin receptor antagonists. These are a class of drugs that go after the wake-promoting chemical in the brain, orexin, and both of the receptors that are associated with that chemical. And like an elegant set of chemical fingers, these DORAs drugs, like suvorexant and lomborexant, they will go down deep into the brain, into the middle of the brain, and they act, as I said, like a chemical set of fingers that just elegantly dials down the volume of wakefulness and step back and allow the antithesis of wakefulness to come in its place, which is this thing called more naturalistic sleep. So they are the kind of Web 3.0 of new sleeping pills. And there is lots of evidence to support their benefit in terms of improving sleep. And they seem not only not to have some of the side effects of the Web 2.0 medications, things like Ambien or Lunesta or Sonata, but they actually have a lot going for them. And I've done several podcasts that describe how some of these drugs can even increase the ability of your brain to cleanse itself of the Alzheimer's toxins, beta amyloid and tau protein. But again, please go back and have a listen to those podcasts. Here, what I'm talking about is these dual orexin receptor antagonists, these DORAs drugs like suvorexant and lomborexant. And not only have we discovered that they will increase the total amount of sleep that you have and decrease the amount of time that you're awake, but they often seem to enhance and increase rapid eye movement sleep. And in fact, traditional sleeping pills, if anything, will often suppress or decrease the amount of rapid eye movement sleep. So it's really a fascinating drug, or class of drugs, I should say, these DORAs drugs, that not only preserve but even increase the amount of REM sleep, whilst helping you fall asleep and stay asleep for longer. And there was a 2020 systematic review that found that these DORAs drugs, these dual orexin receptor antagonists, will increase, again, not just the total amount of time awake, but they will also increase the amount of rapid eye movement sleep. And what's interesting is that it doesn't come at the cost of deep sleep. Now, REM sleep and deep sleep are not perfectly antagonistic with each other. It's not to say that if you increase deep sleep, you always decrease REM sleep, or if you increase REM sleep, you always decrease deep sleep. You don't. There is some degree of independence, but sometimes there is some interdependence, and you get that cost versus reward trade-off. But this new class of drugs, the DORAs drugs, seem to increase REM sleep without any detrimental deficit or reduction in deep sleep. So in other words, they promote not just a more natural architecture of sleep, but also increase the amount of rapid eye movement sleep. All of those are prescription drugs that I've been describing. You can't just go out and buy them off the shelf. Those are all FDA-regulated medications, and you need a prescription for them. What about supplements in the space for enhancing REM sleep? Well, the evidence is it's pretty mixed, to be honest. There was an interesting randomized control trial just last year published looking at magnesium L3 and 8. And magnesium supplementation is interesting. Most forms of magnesium, things like magnesium citrate, etc., they do not cross the blood-brain barrier. That's why I'm always perplexed why people will say, oh, here's a magnesium supplement for sleep. Well, sleep is generated by the brain. But if that form of magnesium does not cross the blood-brain barrier, then how is it going to impact your sleep? And now there are some indirect ways it may do that, for example, through muscle relaxation that feeds back to the body and enhances sleep. But for the most part, not so much. But there is a form of magnesium called magnesium L3 and 8, and the evidence, even though it's tentative, suggests that it can cross the blood-brain barrier and get into the brain. And this randomized control trial demonstrated that participants who were taking magnesium L3 and 8 showed improvements in their rapid eye movement sleep, but it unfortunately wasn't measured with gold standard polysomnography. It was just measured with their wearable tracker, but I still think that that's interesting data nonetheless. We don't fully understand why magnesium may increase the amount of rapid eye movement sleep, simply that these early studies, these preliminary studies suggest that it may do. Another interesting candidate in this space is vitamin B6. Whilst it doesn't increase the duration of REM sleep, there was a 2018 placebo-controlled study that found that it did at least increase the intensity, the vividness of dreaming, and the ability for you to recall your dreams the next day. So it may be a supplement, maybe what's the good analogy? It's sort of like turning up the color saturation on your dream experiences without extending the total runtime of the movie itself. Does that make some sense when it comes to vitamin B6? The other thing I should probably note from a pharmacological perspective is the inverse of what we're talking about. I'm talking about here so far pharmacology that you want to take to try to increase your REM sleep. Well, what about pharmacology that if you take it may decrease your REM sleep? I want to be utterly clear here. I'm simply going to be describing the scientific evidence. So I'm going to be scientifically descriptive. This is not me being medically prescriptive. I know this makes so much total logical sense, but I need to say it anyway. You should never change your drug regimen based on anything you hear on the internet. You should always check with your doctor. Don't go thinking, well, I heard, this scientist on this podcast say X, Y, and Z, so I'm going to change it myself. Please don't do that. It's your health and it's your life that's on the line. So don't go playing roulette wheel with your health. But let me speak about it. Some of the common medications that will actually decrease rapid eye movement sleep, firstly, are antidepressants. Antidepressants like SSRIs, things like Prozac, and also SNRIs, which are called serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors. Both of those classes of drugs will typically reduce the amount of REM sleep, which can be sometimes actually therapeutic in conditions like depression or PTSD with nightmares, because it tries to lessen some of the nightmare symptomatology in PTSD. And there's some theories out there that in depression there may be an abnormal increase or excessive amount of REM sleep, and these drugs bring that REM sleep back down into a normative state. Because as with all things in biology, including sleep amounts and sleep stages, it's a Goldilocks phenomenon. Not too little, not too much, just the right amount. So those antidepressants will often decrease the amount of REM sleep. Also, other drugs, things like benzodiazepine sedatives, as well as alcohol, are very impressive in their ability to suppress REM sleep, particularly in higher doses. And as one sleep specialist bluntly put it, a night of drinking can wreak havoc on your rapid eye movement sleep. I don't know about wreaking havoc, but it can certainly decrease the amount of rapid eye movement sleep that you have. And then, I've spoken about this before on a podcast, THC is a pretty impressive blockade tool of REM sleep. So you will have significantly less REM sleep, and you will often not remember your dreams. A partner and sponsor of today's podcast is Shopify. Let me share the link right away. Shopify.com/Matt Walker. As someone who spends his days researching sleep, the idea of selling merch felt, well, rather daunting. But I kept getting asked if I had t-shirts or gear. So I finally said, okay, Matt, get your act together and give it a try. And we have them coming. But the big question was, how on earth was someone like me, a scientist, going to get these items into your hands? Everyone said the same thing, use Shopify. It turns out, even me, an analog man in a digital world, was able to do it without any learning curve. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US. From household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. With hundreds of ready-to-use templates, you can build a really impressive online store that matches your brand style. Oh, and if you need artificial intelligence-powered help writing product descriptions or touching up images, Shopify's got that too. All of which is to say that if you're ready to sell, just try Shopify. So if you are interested, turn your business idea into reality with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/mattwalker. Once more, that's shopify.com/mattwalker. So that is in part pharmacology. Let's speak about some behavioral approaches to enhancing REM sleep. These strategies often work by removing obstacles that are otherwise blocking your natural brain's ability to generate and express lots more REM sleep than perhaps your sleep tracker currently suggests. One of those, if you are someone who is struggling with sleep, is called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI. It's the gold standard behavioral treatment for many sleep problems. Whilst it's not specifically a treatment that is targeting REM sleep, there was some great research, I think it was by Savenka and colleagues, and they showed that after 8 weeks of CBTI, insomnia patients not only improved the amount of total sleep, but in particular, they seemed to significantly increase the amount of REM sleep. And so by teaching patients how to fall asleep more easily, but also in particular stay asleep more soundly throughout the night, particularly in the second half of the night. And as you'll remember from this show, it's the second half of the night and the last couple of hours of sleep when we get most of our rapid eye movement sleep, and we'll come back to this in a second. So if you teach and train people to stay asleep throughout the night with this very effective behavioral technique, it allows the brain to cycle through more of those sleep stages, especially later in the morning, where those sleep cycles are comprised of more REM sleep. So in this regard, think of it a little bit like clearing traffic from a highway. Once the roadblocks of insomnia are removed, your brain can smoothly cruise through all of the different sleep territories, but particularly it can cruise more smoothly and in a manner that is not stop-start late into the morning, where you get lots of that REM sleep. Another interesting approach that has been demonstrated to enhance REM sleep is mindfulness meditation. And this is another powerful behavioral approach. There was a 2006 study that compared the sleep of middle-aged yoga and vipassana meditation practices versus non-meditators. Now, this isn't a causal intervention. This is simply associational. But surprisingly, what they found was that the long-term meditators showed significantly more REM sleep, essentially displaying a younger profile of REM sleep amount relative to their chronological age and relative to their chronological age match controls. So it's as if meditation, potentially if it stands up in causal manipulations, can create almost like a time capsule for your sleep architecture, preserving a more youthful REM sleep pattern even as you age. Of course, we don't know if this is simply associational or reverse causality. For example, it could just be that for whatever reason, people who have greater amounts of REM sleep are also those who seem to have a predilection to go into long-term meditation. So I don't mean to put cart before the horse here and infer sort of reverse causality. It could be one or the other, but I just wanted to note that just in case. One of the definitively causal manipulations that we have in the literature to increase REM sleep is exercise. Regular physical exercise is widely known to improve both your sleep quality, and it can also increase the amount of deep non-REM sleep. And here's the caveat: as long as you're not doing these sort of ultra marathon-like extreme cardio exercise regimens, you can increase the amount of REM sleep with prototypical amounts of exercise that most people who say, well, I exercise, normally do. But when you go to the extreme, it looks again like it's this sort of U-shaped function that if you're not doing too much exercise, your REM sleep is usually on average lower. If you're doing a good amount of exercise, your REM sleep increases. And then if you seem to do extreme levels of cardio exercise, your REM sleep can actually decrease. We don't quite know why, by the way. And there was a randomized trial by Richards and colleagues, and they found that in nursing home residents, so these are people who are older and who had been typically sedentary, once they causally engaged in a program of progressive resistance training, so progressive weight training, as well as walking, not only did they increase the total amount of sleep that they got, but that progressive resistance training and walking regimen significantly increased the amount of REM sleep. And one of the ways that we think improved fitness allows greater REM sleep is not necessarily by only generating more REM sleep, which it seems to, but it also reduces the fragmented nature of your sleep. In other words, you sleep in a more consistent and continuous amount throughout the night. And that prevents you from having these frequent awakenings that will interrupt your REM sleep cycles. And therefore, when you prevent that interruption of the REM sleep cycles, you elongate the REM sleep cycle duration, and therefore you increase the total amount of opportunity to get REM sleep. So it's a little bit like fixing the potholes on your sleep highway. Smoother roads mean your sleep journey includes all of the important destinations, particularly and especially during REM sleep. Next, let's speak about lifestyle factors rather than behavioral factors. And we can speak about some everyday lifestyle choices that can significantly impact your REM sleep. The science suggests that diet can have a subtle but potentially meaningful effect on your sleep architecture. And there's some great work showing that macronutrient balance, in other words, fat, carbohydrate versus protein, can shift the proportion, the balance between REM sleep and deep non-REM sleep. And what they found, and again, I don't think this is the most robust way to augment your REM sleep, but these are really high quality studies. High carbohydrate diets, and here we're talking about complex carbohydrate, not simple sugars, but higher carbohydrate diets typically led to significantly greater amounts of REM sleep when you compared them with low carb diets. And there was a fascinating crossover trial that showed that when healthy volunteers ate a carb-rich meal in the evening, they had a quicker entrance into REM sleep in the first cycle of the non-REM to REM cycle, and they had more rapid eye movement sleep in the first half of the night compared to when those same individuals ate a low carb but also high fat meal. So in other words, it's the same participants when they're eating a high carb, somewhat low fat meal versus a low carb, high fat meal in the evening. The high carb, low fat meal resulted in a quicker entry into rapid eye movement sleep and significantly greater amounts of REM sleep at a time when typically we don't have that much REM sleep, which is in the first half of the night. Which, by the way, brings me back. I was remiss to tell you that perhaps one of the most influential behavioral factors, and don't forget here we're talking about lifestyle factors, just previously we spoke about behavioral factors, one of the most reliable, one of the most effective behavioral ways that you can increase your REM sleep is by delaying the time that you wake up. In other words, if you sleep later into the morning, let's say that you will typically go to bed at the same time, but you wake up maybe 15 or 20 or 30 minutes later that following morning, because you're sleeping later into the morning, which is where your REM sleep rich phase of sleep is typically going to be. So in other words, early in the night, when you go to the finger buffet, I don't know why I'm using finger buffet, but you get the idea. When you go to the finger buffet, the brain likes to feast on a lot of deep non-REM sleep early in the night. But the later and later into the night that you go into those early morning hours, the more the brain says, you know what, I'm kind of satiated. I'm pretty full with my deep non-REM serving. Now I really want to go after REM sleep. So an easy way to get more REM sleep is just elongate that later morning sleep by, let's say, 15, 20, 30 minutes. And that way you can start to game the system and get more REM sleep back. Okay, sorry, That was a really important point. You can tell these podcasts are not somewhat straightforward. These are sometimes a stream of consciousness and are not a particularly good one, a rather polluted one at that. Coming back to diet, we've now switched from behavioral factors coming back to lifestyle factors. We've been speaking about diet. So I told you that these carb-rich meals in the evening with lower fat increase the amount of REM sleep. Why is that? Well, the mechanism we believe likely involves something called insulin and tryptophan. Carbohydrates help tryptophan to reach the brain, which then boosts serotonin, which boosts some downstream additional chemicals that ultimately promote rapid eye movement sleep. So think of these carbs almost like the Uber service or the pickup service that gets tryptophan past the bouncers and the VIP red rope section, and it goes into the brain's exclusive nightclub, which is where you're going to get a lot more REM sleep. In contrast, very low carb diets, like those that are, for example, strict keto, we often see that they will suppress rapid eye movement sleep. Sometimes those keto diets, which are very strict and low in carbohydrates, will sometimes increase deep non-REM sleep, but not always. They essentially create this significant trade-off between REM sleep and non-REM sleep. So that's something that you have to keep in mind if you are on one of those strict keto diets. It could be one of the reasons why you may not necessarily be seeing as much REM sleep as you did when you were not on a keto diet. So what's the takeaway here? Balanced diets with moderate complex carbohydrates and ample micronutrients probably create the best scenario for normal amounts, or at least the greatest potential amount of REM sleep that you, the individual, can generate. Okay, admission time. I've probably eaten more protein bars in my life than I've blinked, and I'm always on the hunt for the very best. Then I found David Protein Bars. In fact, it was Dr. Peter Attia who clued me in. He was involved in their development. Knowing his standards, I trusted them immediately. Each bar delivers 28 grams of protein, just 150 calories, and 0 sugar. That's the best protein to calorie ratio I've seen, and the taste is legitimately good. Protein isn't just about muscle, it's essential for metabolic health and for keeping you full. And David's unique ratio makes these the most satiating bars out there. Here's the kicker. Demand has been so high that the full lineup of 8 flavors is currently sold out on the website. They'll probably be back in stock by the fall or autumn for us Brits. In the meantime, you can find them on Amazon or use the store locator on their website to grab them nearby. Try them out for yourself at davidprotein.com/mattwalker for a special deal for all you folks. Again, that's davidprotein.com/mattwalker. Let me now speak about another lifestyle factor, which is not what you put into your body in terms of food, but what you expose your body to in terms of light. Light exposure is perhaps the most powerful lifestyle lever for REM sleep alteration. The timing of when you see bright light and darkness governs your circadian rhythm. Please go and listen to any one of the wonderful podcasts on this topic by my friend Dr. Andrew Huberman. But the timing of when you see bright light and when you see darkness around the 24-hour clock face governs your circadian rhythm, which in turn dictates when REM sleep occurs and also how much REM sleep occurs. And there was a remarkable study by Vathi, and I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, in 2022. They found that when participants spent evenings under blue light depletion, meaning that they weren't getting lots of blue light exposure from those devices, essentially dim, very dim, sort of very low lux, maybe below 10 or 5 lux, which is a measure of light intensity, dim light that was very warm, very sort of orangey red in its color, that resulted in those individuals having greater amounts of total REM sleep duration compared to standard bright indoor lighting that also contains a bluish tone to it. So in other words, these specific smart lighting conditions, these what we call blue depleted evenings, yielded not just greater amounts of REM sleep, but greater amounts of consolidated REM sleep. So not only do you get a little bit more REM sleep here and there, but the bouts of REM sleep that you get are even more sweeping and long in their total duration. And you had fewer of those frustrating awakenings that were interrupting your precious dream cycles. So by avoiding blue light in the evening, it may allow the brain, potentially actually through a melatonin mechanism, it may allow the brain to dedicate more of its subsequent night by being blue light depleted when you are awake in the evening to obtain greater amounts of REM sleep. So it's a little bit like removing a dam that was blocking the natural flow of your sleep river, and suddenly REM sleep can flow more freely throughout the night. Two other critical lifestyle elements I should mention. This is a really hard one. Stress management and also sufficient sleep opportunity. Now, I've spoken just a second ago about sleep opportunity. The longer of a sleep opportunity you have later into the morning, the greater amount of REM sleep that you'll get. It's probably the simplest, the easiest, I don't want to use the word hack, but mechanistic suggestion that I can give you to get more REM sleep. But another thing that is very good at blocking your REM sleep is when you are under conditions of stress. Chronic stress leads to high cortisol. High cortisol leads to a suppression of REM sleep. And it also makes your REM sleep episodes more fragmented. And I was just saying what you want is these nice, long, continuous bouts of REM sleep. So evening relaxation rituals, whatever it is that works for you, whether it's reading or having a hot bath or a shower, gentle yoga or journaling, anything that tries to de-stress your mind is ultimately going to allow you to get into REM sleep faster, leading to a calmer neurochemical brain, which leads to smoother REM sleep physiology, these smoother, long, continuous bouts, and therefore you get more REM sleep. And then again, don't forget about the late morning REM sleep. This is why I've often said that it's so important to understand that deep sleep comes in the first half of the night, REM sleep comes in the second half. If you were to think about someone who normally goes to bed from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and I'm not suggesting that's ideal, it's different based on your chronotype, but this is the person's typical regimen. But the next morning, they've got to wake up. Let's say they want to get a jump start on the day and get to the gym early, or they've got a flight to get to. Instead of waking up at 7 a.m., they wake up at 5 a.m. So they've lost 2 hours from their 8-hour sleep opportunity. How much sleep have they lost? Well, they've lost 25% of all of their total sleep. Well, yes and no. They've lost 25% of all of their total sleep, but because REM sleep comes in the second half of the night, and especially in the last 2 hours of the night, they may have lost most, if not all of those late REM sleep cycles. So their REM sleep will be deficient by as much as 40 or 50%. They may have lost that much REM sleep. So 25% total sleep lost, but maybe 40, 50, 60, 70% of their REM sleep lost. Last thing to come on to, technological aids for REM sleep. The 21st century has brought some exciting technologies that can both monitor and potentially enhance your REM sleep. I think this is where we come on to some of the new techniques regarding something called electrical brain stimulation. Don't think of this as a pharmaceutical, but think of this as an electroceutical. Essentially, what we're going to be doing with these types of devices, and I should probably have a disclaimer. I have one of these companies. I co-founded a company called Stim Science, and we do electrical brain stimulation for sleep. We're not yet targeting specifically REM sleep. It's a tool that is designed to enhance your speed with which you fall asleep and increase the degree that you sleep. But these techniques have been used, at least in a research setting in the laboratory, not as a commercial device, which is that company, but to successfully enhance either deep non-REM sleep, and also more recently, they've been targeting REM sleep. And specifically what you're trying to do here is insert a small amount of voltage into the brain, so small that you typically don't feel it, but it has a measurable impact on the brain. And what you're going to be trying to do, depending on which stage of sleep that you're in, those different stages of sleep have different brainwave patterns. So deep non-REM sleep has a very slow, big, powerful brainwave oscillation. So these brainwaves are going up maybe just once or twice up and down per second. Now, that sounds maybe a little bit quick, but for the brain, that's very, very slow. As you're listening to this, awake, hopefully, your brain is going up and down maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 times a second. But in deep non-REM sleep, it's only going up and down maybe once or twice a second. But REM sleep is a bit more like waking brain activity. There, the brain activity is going up and down maybe 4, 5, 6 times per second. And riding on top of that is something that we call beta wave brainwave activity, which is a little more closer to 20 to 25 times or cycles per second, or 25 hertz. And what researchers try to do is essentially insert electrical waves that are similar to the types of brainwave frequencies of the stage of sleep that you're trying to enhance. So when someone goes into deep slow wave sleep, deep non-REM sleep, you insert electrical wave activity that is going up and down at a similar 1 to 2 cycles per second. It's almost like you're acting as a choir to a flagging lead vocalist and boosting the overall volume signal that's coming from the brain for any one of those stages of sleep. And as I said, for REM sleep, it's a different set of brainwave frequencies that we use to stimulate. So it's a little bit like personalized electrical brainwave stimulation, and you can tailor it to whichever specific frequency or sleep stage frequency you like. These stimulators, there are several companies now out there, and as I said, full disclaimer, I am a co-founder of one of those companies, but right now I would say that they are in the early stages of development. These devices, you can buy them online, these direct current brain stimulation devices. Please don't do DIY. You go onto YouTube, you can see people who have had these terrible disasters where they've got the frequency or the voltage wrong. They've lost their eyesight for several days. This is not a DIY situation by any means. But these are some of the new technologies that are coming online where we're trying to essentially speak in the currency of the brain, speak in the language of the brain, which is electricity, rather than the molecular compounds of the brain, which is the chemistry of the brain. So this is the era of personalized electroceuticals rather than broadband pharmaceuticals. And by enhancing those stimulation frequencies at the time when you are in any one of those stages of sleep, you're trying to double down and boost the overall quality of that electrical REM sleep brainwave pattern. Does that make some sense? Okay, so what's the bottom line here? What have we been over? Well, I've spoken about pharmacological ways that you can enhance REM sleep, mostly by prescription medications, but there are some supplements out there that may have very modest effects. We've spoken about some behavioral changes that you can do, things like exercise, resistance training. We've spoken about some lifestyle interventions. We've spoken about things such as altering your light in the evening, particularly blocking that blue light may help enhance REM sleep. I should also note, by the way, that if you get some bright light in the morning, and I failed to include this in the section, the evidence isn't vastly overwhelming. It seems as though the light manipulation that you do at night has a greater impact on your REM sleep enhancement than the amount of light exposure that you have in the morning. Nevertheless, if you reverse engineer the trick in the morning, get lots of bright natural daylight that has a nice distribution of that blue light, together with other wavelengths of light, that can also lead to a later evening effect, such that when you go to bed having had bright light exposure in the morning, that can subtly increase the amount of REM sleep. So if you really want to get your light correct and optimized for better REM sleep, block that blue light at night, make your light exposure in the last hour before bed very dim, approximately below 50 lux, certainly probably around about 10 lux, if not 5 lux, if possible, which is very, very dim, and try to remove especially that blue light in the evening. Then we spoke about some nutritional advice, more complex, rich carbohydrates in the evening can typically mean that you enter REM sleep sooner and you may get a little bit of a REM sleep benefit. This may be due to some aspects of tryptophan modulation. And then also making sure that you avoid REM sleep blocking things that you take into your body, things like alcohol as well as THC. And then finally, we spoke a little bit about some of the behavioral interventions, things like meditation, stress reduction, etc. All of those can remove the roadblock that is preventing your true ultimate sort of Olympic expression of REM sleep. And then finally, we spoke about some of the new emerging technologies, particularly electrical brain stimulation and these electroceutical approaches, where you're trying to sing in time with that REM sleep rhythm and therefore boost the electrical quality and enhance the total duration of REM sleep quantity at night. I hope this has been interesting. I hope it's been meaningful. Let me know if you want more of these sort of how-to podcasts, how to increase the total amount of REM sleep, how to decrease the frequency of those 3 a.m. awakenings, how to increase the amount of deep sleep or increase your HRV. If this is meaningful, send me stuff on social media. Tell me, yes, we like these, or no, just go back to sort of all of the wonderful things about sleep rather than these how-to episodes. And with that, I will simply say thank you, take care, good night, dream well. All the best. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.